Hello to our listeners who we love so much, so much
So
today.
much.
So much.
So much. Do you know we pray for you, by the way, every time we get on? We pray for
Yeah.
you and we love you.
hmm We love you. And today we are talking about endings. And if you didn't listen to last week's episode, you may have missed that next week is going to be the last episode of the Our Time to Rise podcast. And it's a weird feeling for us. We are definitely sitting in this weirdness. We have been doing this for 10 years. Our first episodes were about summertime with kids at home.
The Summer Survival Series.
The summer survival series. And I think I still had someone taking naps. And a lot has happened in the last 10 years. And we thought, as we processed the ending of the podcast, that it might open up a larger conversation for us to have with you about endings in general and why they matter. And really, when I think about the pain point of midlife, we often talk about change, but I think if we even pull that back farther, it is endings. Endings of things that we love or of dreams that we had, the things that we're recognizing aren't ever going to come to fruition, likely. So we wanted to talk about that today and why endings don't have to be all bad. There is grief, for sure. We want to recognize it and we don't want to gloss over it. And at the same time, that's a one-dimensional aspect to an ending. And this is really a full circle thing. We want to talk about how we approach endings with health and maybe with a long-term perspective of what something has offered us for its time.
Hmm.
We have been presented, I think, with this question of if something ends, did it ever really matter?
Profound. We're going to go a little philosophical today because think about it. Like, this is a really deep philosophical question.
Mm-hmm.
If something ends, did that time matter?
Mm-hmm. And there could be lots of things. So, today we're talking about the podcast, but it could be a marriage. When I think about the last 10 years, now, Krista and I have been friends longer than 10 years, but we're going to be talking about just the podcast, the last 10 years. We have had a lot of change in our lives, but we've had a lot of change in the lives of people around us and loss, lives that have ended, but also marriages, careers, jobs. There are a lot of things. And I would say for the majority of our listeners, this sense of our stage of mothering ending, where we are the full-time caregiver for our kids, and we have transitioned into the sideline cheerleader. And that is an ending that, for many of us, includes a lot of grief and a lot of opportunity. When you think about endings, Krista, what comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I think it's, for me, the resounding answer when I think about endings is yes, it mattered.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it mattered because if we go back to, and this is something that is a Dallas Willard that I go back to over and over and over again in my life, but I credit him for this quote: who you are becoming is the most important thing happening at any given moment. So if who you are becoming is primary because it affects everything else, it's like the first domino that affects all the other dominoes, it makes them all fall. Then those things that are shaping us at that time are key and vital to our development and growth as a person. And when it's happy and good and amazing, great, sure, we're being developed. But even in those hard, painful suffering seasons, well, that's actually often where we develop the most, where our faith deepens the most. And so even though we may not like something, like if someone has, let's say, a career ending and it was
Mm-hmm.
painful.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that time is hard, but it mattered a lot because who you were becoming in that season is of the most important value, according to Dallas Willard. And I believe him.
Mm-hmm.
that is critical because hopefully throughout the arc of our lives, we are becoming more and more and more Christ-like. We are becoming deeper and deeper and deeper, and we are moving toward that eternal being more and more and more. So that to me is probably the number one reason that yes, if something ends, did it matter? Yes, because who we became in that is so important.
Mm-hmm. And really, we have this juxtaposed against the reality that God does not change and he does not end. He is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. Nothing is without him. And so the things that we build in this world, the things we create, are temporary. And we don't like that because that is our sinful nature to say, but I am like God. That's not the conscious thought, but it's the unconscious motivation that we have. And so we think when we build something, it will become great and that greatness will last. But, you know, in my work, my day job, I work a lot with churches and I work a lot with ministries. And every church and every organization has a life cycle. And it is so hard for people to believe that we are maybe on the dying end because we just don't want to believe that. So this can be taken so many different directions. But even let's take a church, for example. My church that I am part of in Denver, Celebration Community Church, we're a small congregation. We were essentially gifted this incredible property in the middle of Denver that we would never have been able to afford because and I say this in quotes, a dying congregation had the land and said, we want another church that is on the growth, the upward, to take the baton and use this property for God's glory. And so to remember too that an ending is part of the life cycle, but it's also part of God's cycle of saying this provides opportunity for space. So in the case of the podcast for both of us, just capacity, schedule, mind, brain space, time, energy, resources. It opens up those places for us to perhaps serve God in a different way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it reminds me. I mean, I've been doing a lot of yard work, and
Mm-hmm.
it does remind me. I mean, we have a physical representation of that in nature, that as things go dormant or die in the winter, and then the rebirth in the spring, and how we have to, that's a part of it. That's a part of God's earthly cycle. And we are a part of that too. And so I think that's really beautiful, Alex.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that you and I like to talk about is the book From Strength to Strength. And that's been an impactful resource for both of us. It's a book by Arthur Brooks. For those of you that haven't read it yet, we would highly recommend it. It's about the second half of life. How do you live well in the second half of life? So, Alex, can you talk a little bit about how does this idea of necessary endings relate to some of Arthur Brooks' concepts in that book?
Yeah. When I tell people to read it, because I recommend the book a lot, I always say, you've got to get through the first 2 chapters. They're really hard because what they do is they talk about the reality of our aging selves and how we cannot do the same things the same way. And that a lot of struggle in midlife is us trying to use what he calls the fluid intelligence, which is problem solving, and it peaks early in life. It's when our brains are at their best, and also it's when we have a lot of energy. So that idea, if I just try harder, I will get better results, does work at a phase of our life.
Right.
And then in this beginning of this book, he explains, and then it doesn't. anymore. And we can either keep hitting our head against the wall, or we can recognize I am different now, and this is a different strength. Thus, the title From Strength to Strength. That as I change, I need to recognize that these strengths are different. And that now I have what he calls crystallized intelligence, which is wisdom. I've been through this before, so I am less likely to panic when something comes up. Pattern recognition, meaning making. So things that someone who has lived some life can bring to the conversation. So I think this is important because part of it is just the recognition that things change and we change. And we have the option of fighting against that change and feeling really frustrated, or accepting the change and kind of going with the current of where our strength is. And that's going to be easier and more fruitful. So no matter the ending that we're experiencing, if we can see it as this is a new current that I'm going to flow with, if that doesn't feel too woo-woo, I'm going to go with this because this is a new season of life. But also, I am better prepared because of what I experienced from whatever is ending, whether it's a relationship, a job, a state of health, physical health, maybe. I am better prepared to face this change and what is now because of what I've experienced. I'm bringing all of that with me. And also, I'm not going to try to do the old things the same way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he uses Darwin and J.S. Bach at the beginning of the book as an example. So Darwin, apparently, he did not age a happy man. He was really miserable at the end of his life and depressed. And we know that profile. We know the person who doesn't age well and they become angrier and they become more bitter. And then he contrasts that with J.S. Bach, who was basically, one of the most famous composers of his time, but then his son really became better than him and more famous under his tutelage, and how he reveled in that and had this joy in more of a teaching mode and a come alongside people mode. And he died a happy man because he transitioned well and he let go of trying to be the best composer of the time. Now, we don't see him as an inferior composer at all. I mean, in fact, I wonder, who knows some of you in that world may know where everybody ranks. I don't. I just know J.S. Bach is one of the greatest, the GOATs, like one of the greatest of all time. And so how amazing, though, that in his lifetime, he didn't strive to hold on and white knuckle grip where he was. He just let it go and leaned into mentoring and tutoring and educating these other composers, including his son, and the beauty that came from that, and the music and the art that came from that is profound in history.
Yeah. And we are now the elders in the room.
Yes.
I feel like from when we started to now, so to the last decade, was kind of our transition. That's what midlife is, right? When you're going from being the apprentice to the person who may not have the same level of energy, but has something to offer. And so as this podcast is closing and ending, we want to recognize that we are leaving different people. And that doesn't mean that all of those things, all of those conversations, all of those times you, listener, pushed play didn't matter. They really, really did. And we are so grateful for them. And we are so grateful we got to participate in it with you.
What would you say to this idea that throughout our lives and throughout our experiences, we are building things like resilience and emotional intelligence and purpose, and we're getting clarity as we go through, and how important those things are? I mean, I personally feel like the podcast has given me that at so many junctures in my own journey. that, and we're going to talk about that a little bit in the next episode, but that it's given me resilience when I needed it. It's given me a word of hope. It's given me an idea that I really latched onto. Yeah, I can think of so many ideas, and listener, you've heard them, because for example, when I talk about Ken Weitzma's narrowing margins and being the birthplace of innovation, that was an idea that I pocketed, planted it in my heart, and it bloomed over a decade. I mean, that
Mhm.
one idea from that one podcast episode, that's just one of so many, but it really helped me and served me along the way and still does. And so, how have you, I think, as we're looking at this idea of did it count in the
Mhm.
middle?
Mhm.
And what are some of your thoughts around that?
Well, first, I want to observe that those things grew in you because you were open to listening.
Mm.
And I think for many people our age, we get to a point, and part of the crisis and the uncomfortableness is that we have stopped listening and we have stopped being open to change and to growth. So we have changed for sure over 10 years and probably at our own rates. And there probably is a direct correlation with how open we've been to the change and also what life has thrown us and what we've had to deal with. But we know that muscles are grown when we practice something. So I think that is to your credit
Mm.
that you have grown because you have been willing to listen and take other people's perspective into account when making your own decisions. And for sure, the podcast has introduced me to so many interesting people, interesting ideas. And because of that, I have been able to broaden my world in a phase of life where I was pretty close to home. My kids they still are at home, some of them. And I just wasn't in a phase where I could be going to all these places and experiencing all these things, but the podcast allowed me to. And I'm hoping for many of our listeners that was also the case, that we were able to introduce people to other people, whether it's writers. And I'm thinking of one friend in particular. She had some things revealed in her marriage because of a podcast she listened to. She introduced the guest to her husband. They started listening to some things together, and some things came out that she had no idea were there. And her life changed dramatically because of one episode that she listened to, and therefore was open to listening, learning more, and going on that change journey.
Hmm.
We ended our retreats, which we've talked about on the podcast before, last fall. And so that was the beginning of an ending for us. It was the domino effect. We knew that by ending the retreat, we would likely be ending the podcast. So I'm a little bit past that ending point, whereas this is very fresh right now in the moment. Like we're recording our last few episodes right now. And the retreats ended, but the friendships that I'm taking with me are so incredible. And that's a very tangible thing, that those friendships are going to continue to grow. Those relationships will travel and journey with me, and I will be surprised probably by how they morph over time. I mean, even today, I'm having a call with someone that I really got to know through one of the retreats. And I wouldn't have known 5 years ago that she and I would be having this conversation later today about something that's going on in her life. And I want to be a good friend. So we just never know, too, that the things that we carry with us, which of those seeds, whether it's an idea, a relationship, a dream, an investment, what's going to sprout later.
That is so true. It reminds me of a quote that I was looking at in preparing for this episode by Soren Kierkegaard. And he says, life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. And it reminds me that we only see through a certain lens, but
Mhm.
as we live, God widens our lens and we understand things differently as we go along. And so there may be some things in our story that ended that we don't quite understand why it ended. And maybe we'll never know until
Mhm.
the other side of death. But trusting a good God that endings have purpose too.
Mhm.
I'm thinking about this idea of how do we not waste an ending? Like, how do you mine a season for what it was and not waste it? What are some of your
Mhm.
thoughts around that?
Well, I think if we're stuck in this question of did it matter, we can look for maybe the ripple effects. Like, for example, this podcast, it's ending. So, did any of this matter? But that story I just told of my friend, I know it mattered in at least one person's life. And so often we can be focused on how an ending is impacting us if we are the main character in that ending. And really, an ending is impacting other people around us as well. So I think about recently, my boss for many years retired. Well, she was the main story in that, the main character in that story. And she's being impacted most greatly, I would. But she could end her career and say, did any of that matter? But the ripple effects of her leaving are there. And it did matter. And things that she started that are continuing, but also people that she invested in. I am one of them. I carry with me the things that she planted. So even though she had an ending, it impacted me. So sometimes if we are wondering, I think look for the ripples and see who else did it impact. I would also say it's easier to look back and say something was significant if we have documented significance along the way. If, say, with our kids, we can forget. I mean, how many things have I forgotten that we did that were fun? And then I go back on my phone and I'm like, oh my gosh, look at us. We dressed as cows for Chick-fil-A free sandwich day. Or, I wouldn't have thought of that if I didn't have a documentation of it. But there are other things that we can do to document. We can celebrate milestones. And when we remember those milestones, I think it helps us remember that it was significant because we have short memories. And like literally, I have a short memory. There are whole years of my life I don't remember. But also, our hearts have short memories.
Yeah.
And to see something in its entirety is hard for us, especially if it's something that lasted for years. So to think about, okay, what were the markers along the way that showed that it was meaningful throughout, even in the process itself, even in the building, even in the growing, even in the hard, even in the arguing, maybe, but that there were moments that I can point to that act as benchmarks that remind me.
Mm-hmm. It's great, which is why journaling, I think, is so helpful too.
Mhm.
What about someone who's, I'm just going to use marriage as an example because we have some friends who are in crisis in their lives because of a failed marriage. And I say failed in quotes because they're the only ones that can, navigate that term. But what are your thoughts around that? Like, how does someone see a season that feels like it just burned up? Like, I think of a forest fire. And
Mhm.
I think of a forest fire coming through a forest and it just ravages everything in its path. That's at least I have a couple in my life right now that they feel like that. Like there's just been this ravaging fire that's just eaten everything up. What are some of your thoughts? Like, how do people look back on or see that ending?
Gosh, I feel like I'm answering this from an outside perspective and not so much from a lived perspective. I do know that God is not surprised by our questions. And there are some things that happen in life that make us say, what in the world, God? Why would you allow this? I did everything right, or so I thought. But I am not getting the formula response. I thought if I did these things, this would be the result. So that could be in parenting, take that in any direction. And marriage is a good one. I thought that this was going a certain direction and it didn't. I do know many people who now are years past that pain point, that initial raw pain, who are able to say things like, my marriage gave me my children, my joy. Those years were good years. We did have good memories. I think there can be this question of, was it all a facade? Was it not real? And I don't have real clear answers to that, but I do know that God was there. He was there before those moments occurred. He was there in those moments, and he remains behind, which means there was something good there because he was there. I hope that doesn't feel like a trite answer, because this is life's big pain questions that there are no easy answers to. And especially something that you have invested your whole life in, like a child or a spouse, or for many people, a career. And I know a lot of people whose careers ended early with a little bit of a forced retirement, and they spent the rest of their lives angry because they felt unappreciated. And so then again, it gets to that, where do we have choice and where do we have agency? And I don't want to skim over the hard, but maybe we go through the hard with the idea that we're going to get to another side, that there is going to be something more on the other side, but that we have to walk through it. So whether it's grief or anger, and work through it so that we can reap the benefits of that growth.
Yeah, I really love that. How do we reap the benefits of a suffering season? Because that is a suffering season. Or I think about even physically, and I can't help but think of that because of my own journey, that what once was for me will never be again. And so it's not like that health of like me having full mobility. That was an ending that will actually, like, that's an ending forever. Like, I'll never have it again. And so what do I do with that? Or for someone who's like, their marriage ended, they will never have it again. So what do you do with that? And that it's honoring the pain. And then, as Jerry Sitzer says, not collapsing in on ourselves within it.
Mm-hmm.
Have I talked about what he describes, the primary emotions and secondary emotions, on the podcast?
I can't remember. We've had a lot of conversations.
Okay.
A lot of episodes.
Well, so this was something I went to a forgiveness seminar several weeks back. And if you've heard this, I mean, just hear it again because we could all actually use it. So Jerry Sitzer, who is just this incredible theologian, we've had him on the podcast. He's amazing. He wrote a book called A Grace Disguised. For anyone in loss, you must read it. But he talked about this idea of primary and secondary emotions. Primary emotions are human. They are, because we're alive, we are going to feel disappointment, anger. We're going to feel sad, deep sadness. We're going to feel frustrated. He said, but in between primary emotions and secondary emotions, we have a choice. And secondary emotions are, for example, when hatred turns to unforgiveness, or when anger turns to bitterness. And what he calls it is when we go to secondary emotions, so our sadness becomes despair. Well, now we're collapsing in on ourselves. In between our primary and secondary emotions, we have a choice. And that choice makes all the difference of whether we are chained to our hard emotions or we're set free from them in order to, what you just said, what I believe is reap the benefits of those hard things.
Mhm.
And we have a choice in that. And I think that is so empowering because it's honoring what's real,
Mhm.
but it's also giving agency to where we go with what's real.
Mhm. I was thinking about this idea of closing ceremonies,
Mhm.
the ritualizing of things, and you're really, really good at this, and I am not. I would like to back out of the room slowly, hope nobody notices, and pretend the pain away. That would
Mhm.
be my natural and often is my response to an ending happening. I don't want to deal with it, so let's just skim over it and pretend that it's not happening. And yet it doesn't give real closure. So we may together, and listeners, you may have something where you've realized I have been losing something for a long time. And I'm finally at the point where I'm willing to recognize that either I lost it a long time ago, maybe it's a friendship, maybe it's a dream. I lost it a long time ago, and I'm now finally coming to terms with it. Or, like us, we can't avoid the fact that we're ending the podcast. Like, this is a reality that is going to impact us. And how wonderful a closing ceremony can be. I have been to a divorce party before. I don't know that I um, endorse that, but I mean, it was somebody's closing ceremony. Like, I'm going to close this, but also I am saying that this is an opportunity for new in my life. But I think about funerals and memorial services are closing ceremonies, graduations, which also have this two-sided, and I guess funerals do too, if you think someone's going to heaven, but this two-sided ending and opening up of something new, of launching somebody. Someone just told me recently about another family that sold a family property, and it had a lot of meaning to them. And so they decided, you know what, we're going to spend one last night on the property together as a family. And they had a bonfire and they told stories, and it just felt like a good ending to a long run. But we are not going to end with bitterness. We're going to end with celebration for what has been, and recognize that we can still move forward together in relationship without this thing. So whatever it is, I do wonder if adding a little bit of ceremony can be helpful to people.
Well, and we just did that. I mean, we were
Mhm.
together. We went to Boulder, Colorado, and did a night together and had a special dinner. And we often think about starting things well, but we sometimes forget to
Mhm.
end things well. And so I do think it's an important question. Like, how do we pause and really take stock of, wow, look at what God has done. I'm so grateful. And even in the hard, I'm still grateful
Mhm.
because he's built things in me that I wouldn't have otherwise in that season. I'll never forget in that book Interior Freedom. So in her writings, she writes about being in this convent and how beautiful it is and the gardens and the flowers and then someone goes to visit her and she's in this tiny space with this tiny garden. And they just can't believe that this is the same space that she was writing about, which pointed to her interior freedom, which pointed to, wow, like how deeply she leaned into gratitude and freedom in her own soul. And because of that, saw this immense beauty around her. When from another's perspective, it was actually so tiny and limited.
Mm.
And wow, is that just so convicting? Can we be like her? So free on the interior that our interior world becomes this massive garden.
Mhm. Yeah. And that's really having a posture of open hands, which makes an ending less scary.
Mm-hmm.
because we know that it's all God's anyway.
Mhm. Yes.
It's all His anyway. So if He is leading us down this path, which, again, there's no moral right or wrong decision to end the podcast. It's just trade-offs, and we've decided this is a good decision for us. It's His anyway. Our time is His. So we are trusting that if this is opening us up for opportunity to do other things, He will do it. And, I was thinking as we were praying before we started recording, the retreats led to the podcast. I don't think would have done the retreats if together, you probably would have, but I wouldn't have been part of it if I hadn't had a significant career ending right before we started. And that was hard and painful. And I couldn't see past, but now I have the benefit of looking back and seeing that a very difficult ending for me led to opportunities I couldn't imagine. And so I'm trusting that to be true here as well, that this ending and the periphery endings that go with it, that there will be purpose that is still good and fruitful.
Yeah. That is such a word. So, for those of you who are holding an ending of any kind, here's some questions for you. What did this season teach you? How did it shape who you are today? Who did it allow you to serve? And what strengths did it build in you? Those are 4 questions that it is worthwhile. Trust me, it is worthwhile. There's something really different that happens when we pause and when we write things down. So I would encourage you to write those 4 questions down that are in the show notes and take a few minutes in your own processing of an ending. Write your responses to those 4 things. All right. Well, as we close today, we will see you next week for our last episode. And remember, this is our time to rise.